A lot of people are filming in the vertical format, which is understandable because that's how we most commonly hold our phones. But most video is filmed horizontally. So the problem with filming it vertically is if you play it back on anything other than a vertical screen, say a computer screen or a TV or even a movie screen, you're going to end up with these big heavy black bars here on the side. Now we could scale in to try to fill the screen horizontally, but then we end up losing a lot of content vertically. So hopefully you can turn the camera and get comfortable filming in landscape mode or horizontal mode. This is a much more common format for cinematography, more like the widescreen standard 16:9 aspect ratio.
So for resolution, a lot of you pointed out something like this. But this is the resolution for stills, right? You see JPEG, file format, RAW, JPEG. This is all stuff for stills. What I'm looking for resolution is something more like this, where we're talking about 4K or HD. A lot of you got that right, but enough of you pointed out the resolution for the stills images as opposed to the movies. I just want to make sure you're looking for something that says 4K or HD, 1920 by 1080, something along those lines.
So as a refresher to setting your frame rate and resolution for the built-in camera, this is iOS. Just go to Settings, down to Camera, click on Record Video, and it has a variety of resolutions and frame rates. They're bundled together here. So you can see we've got 1080 at 30, we've got 1080 at 60. You can drop down to 720 at 30 frames per second. But I would recommend 1080 at 30 if you're going to be filming in HD, or if you want to go up to 4K, I would recommend 4K at 30. Remember, 24 frames per second is the quote-unquote most cinematic frame rate we're shooting for.
All right, so here we are on Moment Camera app, and again, the resolution here it's set on 4K. If I tap that, I can rotate through several different resolutions. This is 720, 1080, that's full HD, and then back to 4K. And then our frame rate is just below. Right now it's set on 24. If I tap on that, we can pop up to 30 and back to 24. So if you have a 4K capable device, I would recommend shooting with 4K at 24 frames a second. If you don't have a 4K capable device, then full HD 1080 at 24 frames a second would be great.
For shutter speed and aperture controls, a lot of people pointed at shutter speed and aperture priority on the mode dial. That's not exactly what I want us to be using. I want us to be able to set the camera in manual and then change the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO all independent of each other. The shutter speed and aperture priority modes on the mode dial are useful modes, mostly for still images. In shutter speed priority, you set the shutter speed, and the camera automatically selects an aperture to achieve average exposure. On aperture priority mode, you select the aperture, and the camera automatically selects a shutter speed to achieve an average exposure. On program mode, you select the ISO, and the camera chooses the best shutter speed or aperture. Again, this is for stills. And then on auto mode, the camera selects those three values all on its own: ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. But I want us to be able to set
The shutter speed, aperture, and ISO all independent of each other. And remember, our ISO, we want to keep it as low as possible for whatever situation. Most of the cameras that people are using in class are not going to make good videos past, say, like ISO 800. Absolutely, I would not recommend using 1600 for most of the cameras we have in class. I would say 400 is a safe bet, and just as low as possible for whatever the given situation is. a couple of the cameras in class are quite sophisticated and contemporary and actually can operate at a base level of 1600 no problem, and they can move up beyond that. But chances are, if you have that camera, you purchased it specifically for that, and you know that your camera is good at higher ISO levels. Anyways, also our shutter speed should be related to our frame rate. The rule of thumb is we want our shutter speed to be double the frame rate or as close as possible to that. So I'm going to be shooting at 24 frames a second. Double that would be 1/48th. Right? So if I rotate through my shutter speeds, I can see the closest to 1/48th is 1/50th. Another thing people sort of choked up on was the focus ring, manual focus. So a lot of people pointed at this switch here on the lens barrel that switches between autofocus and manual focus. And yeah, that's right. That's the perfect, you got to switch it into manual focus. But I just want to make sure that everybody knows, because sometimes people don't realize that in order to then actually focus, you have to turn the focus ring. Some cameras, the focus ring is further towards the front, beyond the zoom ring. Some cameras, the focus ring is actually further towards the back, behind the zoom ring. So just make sure. And you can usually tell the zoom ring will have focal length numbers. So here it's 24 to 70. And sometimes the focus ring will have like actual distance, like feet or meters to subject printed near it. Sometimes it could be a little bit confusing because I know some of the Canon kit lenses and some of the Nikon kit lenses, the focus ring is actually just sort of this front element right here. And so if you try to turn it and it doesn't turn, don't turn it because it might break. But if you're switched over into manual focus, your focus ring should turn very freely.